I'm sorry. I'd like to welcome our industry panelists. Thank you so much for being here. We have Dr. Carlos Lopez, Dr. Nick Edwards, and Dr. Meagan Rubel. Thank you all for making. So, like the other panel, I'd like to start with just some introductions from you all, and then we'll have a few questions to get the conversation started. We can take follow-up questions from the audience, and towards the end, we'll just take other questions from the audience that may have not been answered. So if you'd like to, I'll start with your an introduction of yourself, your work, what you do.
Sure. So Meagan Rubel, I am an Associate Director of Data Science at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine, formerly Janssen, specifically in the Global Development Group. So what I do there is I'm working on implementing either development of new algorithms or leveraging real-world data to do things such as long-term disease forecasting for some of our clinical trials to look at impact of things like COVID or flu onto how we might be able to recruit participants. We also do a lot of modeling of the DEI and social determinants of health space. So trying to figure out how we can maximize access to patients, particularly in OUS contexts. It's often very hard to leverage claims or electronic health record data. A lot of that's either private or is very expensive to license. So we're trying to make our own internal data sets that we can try to figure out how we can address disparities in patient recruitment. Those are a couple of the different projects that I work on. We also do a lot with developing ways to use techniques like NLP to automate protocol ingestion into some of our tools, figure out inclusion and exclusion criteria for real world data. So snapshot of all that before this, I actually did a postdoc at UCSD in the lab of Albert Schaub, I think is an affiliated faculty member of the program. And I got my master's in public health and my PhD at Penn. And my work focused on studying the gut microbiome of different sub-Saharan African populations going through dietary transitions from hunting and gathering to pastoralism and agropastoralism, and building predictive models to associate different kinds of disease impacts, such as neglected tropical diseases, soil transmitted helminthiasis, stuff outside the gut like malaria, to look for correlates with the gut microbiome. That was a snapshot. That's my research. It's great to be here. I'll pass it on over.
Hi, I'm Nick Edwards. I'm the CEO and founder at a company called Potato, and it's an early stage startup. We built AI tools. It's kind of like an AI research assistant, and you guys are actually perfect users and customers of Potato. I mean, so what we do is we help with protocol generation for web app. But also you can build computational pipelines and workflows flexibly on the platform, all using like plain language. So I can say, I want to hold this protein, I want to look at docking to this ligand, and it'll put together, each of the tool, it'll pull all the open source tools that we've integrated, and it will put together an entire pipeline. You can just click it and run the experiment on the platform. And then you can actually design the wet lab protocols also to test the things that you do computationally on the platform. It's readysetpotato.com. I'll plug it. Check it out. There's a free link. You can sign up and generate protocols. Check it out. My background, I'm the host of a podcast called Once a Scientist, and I started it about 4 years ago. After I'd left a postdoc here to go work in consulting at BCG for a while, and I had a lot of like scientists that would come up to me and ask me like, how'd you get into consulting? And so I would coach them, and eventually I realized like this a big challenge is that you're trained so narrowly in sciences, and it's hard to look up and see what's out there. And so I started this podcast just as a resource, and It's about 90 episodes or so in. So, check that out. If you're interested in consulting, there's like actually a series on how to get into consulting. But it's people across all businesses. My background, I did a Ph.D. At Brown, joint program with the NIH, and I did all of my dissertation research on the circuitry of dopamine neurons in the midbrain. And so I was using optogenetic tools to look at inputs, outputs, how these circuits are modulated. I've always been interested in circuitry and kind of the interface of, biology and tech. I came here as a postdoc in the School of Medicine and the Department of Neuroscience. Worked with Jeff Isaacson. We looked at the circuitry underlying attention and in mice. So very much still feel like I'm a scientist, even if I'm not doing experiments on a daily basis. Although I do experiments on potato, so it's fine.
I'm Carlos Lopez. I work at Illumina. So our primary product is DNA sequencing systems. I work in global operations. So my role is to essentially manage a team that brings in what product development is developing and bring it into the manufacturing sites. That's a lot of characterization, developing measurement systems, basically understanding how we can measure and control the manufacturing processes that we use. So we partner very closely with product development to understand what those critical parameters are, figure out how to measure them, and then ultimately implement them in manufacturing in a simple, easy to use way, which is much harder than it sounds. My background, I went to UCSD as an undergrad a long time ago. I then went to Boston University for my Ph.D. and I studied tissue engineering. So I was working in a lab focused on drug delivery mechanisms, polymeric systems used for that, encapsulation technology, ways to deliver any type of small molecule. And then I went to do a postdoc in a biophotonics lab, which was a huge stretch for me in a way, because I had to learn a lot more about photonics, how to measure things appropriately using light. And so that was a good pivot for me, and ultimately led me to the role I have now, which is fundamentally like understanding how we can measure things about our product that matter to the quality of the product.
Great. Thank you, panelists, for those introductions and backgrounds of what you do, your backgrounds, in such. So let's just start off with, why did you go into industry? Did you ever consider academia? Did you have a vision of what kind of company you wanted to work for, like startup, bigger company?
I guess I could leave that. So I did want to go to industry early on. I got sort of exposure in my postdoc developing biophotonic systems. We were basically trying to develop label-free biosensing technology, and we actually found an application that could be used for single virus detection. That sort of opened the door to the world of entrepreneurialism and getting a sense of what it takes to commercialize a product or realize a product. It's early stage, obviously, in that environment. So I got some, exposure to looking at business plans, understanding what the business model might look like, fundamentally understanding technology. Is it going to be, usable in the application space we're looking at, and really, deriving a lot of data and understanding can it really be successful? And that was just a taste of it. So I ultimately got sort of interested in understanding how to really actually build, high volume products. And that led me toward the role I have now, which is essentially in manufacturing. But that was sort of the first thing that was exposure for me to see that in a research lab is like, oh, this technology is very powerful, it's very cool, but how do we actually, use it and apply it in a very powerful way? So that was the motivator for me, to sort of see like farther downstream and how that happens, and more specifically with like high volume manufacturing environments.
Yeah, I was kind of an academic through and through, to be honest with you. Like throughout PhD, I thought, you know, I was gonna become a PI, and I still think that I love the feeling of discovery in science, and like nothing tops that. Starting a company is pretty fun. Also hard, like science. Got wrenching. But I planned on becoming an academic. I had some good publications out of my PhD. Got into a really interesting postdoc. Things actually were going really well, and I had helped a friend in a neighboring lab who was a PhD student start kind of building this product, this tool that became a company. And it was very early stage, and I had to kind of figure, was I going to do this? Was I going to continue to do the academic path? And I was out surfing one day, right out here at Black's Beach, and I remember the moment when I was like, wait a second, maybe I actually want to just live in San Diego. You know, can I figure out a way to do that? And still be close to science, and I wasn't sure. And so I thought maybe the entrepreneurial thing was going to be something, but I had kids, and I was like, I couldn't take that risk. So I played a very long-term game, and I decided to go into consulting because I knew I wanted to work at the intersection of business and science. I didn't know a ton about business, so I figured it was like a free, or actually a paid MBA. And then I would come back. Actually, I wanted to work for Illumina because I just knew that was a big company in San Diego. And I did that actually. I came back, worked for Illumina. But I've always had this entrepreneurial itch. It's like I'm just a very restless person. And so I'll do 10 things at once, and some of those will work and some of them won't. And that's how I ended up getting my PhD, and that's how I build companies as well. And so it was something I resisted to actually to kick off and start my own company. But you know, kind of felt like the timing had been right, and like I had spent enough years working for other startups, getting introduced to business, like understanding, knowing the science, like having relationships in the scientific ecosystem. It was kind of like everything kind of came together, and it felt like it was like, you know, fate in a way, even though you know, I won't speak about that, but yeah, I was not planning on going into industry, but I'm very happy that I did. I do miss basic science. I do miss doing like patch quantum electrophysiology and figuring out like real time how like a neural circuit works and what receptors like. It's a cool feeling, but I don't know. I found I can also scratch that itch other ways.
I think I have a very similar background in some respects, in that the discovery aspect of science is just the neatest feeling I think I've ever had. Looking at data, especially from your own research questions that you've posed, and you get to see it for the first time. Like the first time I actually saw the results coming off of the Illumina HiSeq, and I could make sense of them for all of the gut microbiome compositions of populations that have never been looked at before, and start to pitch my questions using all of our immunophenotyping data with that. It was just a very amazing feeling. And I think that I was worried when I was leaving academia that I didn't know for sure that I'd get to feel that again. And I was very relieved. I remember having this conversation with a colleague of mine from work who had actually also been in my lab. And we now work together, saying that I'm so relieved that I still get to do science, like actual discovery-based science here, because I think I had a conception that in a lot of ways it would change, and in many it did. I'm sure that's going to be one of our next questions that we'll get to go into. But the fact that I could still hold on to that discovery piece in a different way was, I think, a very validating piece of my career journey. I thought I was going to be an academic as well, up until I'd say the last 2 years of my PhD. And what happened was I had been a very wet lab focused PhD up until I actually got all of my data, and then I had to figure out how to use that. So I had a deep crash course in R and Python and working the command line and bash coding, and it was all on the ground. So I didn't do a computational biology class. It was a lot of me and very sympathetic and patient postdocs and grad students to help mentor me along the way. So in the process of doing that, and also I have to go back in time, when I was collecting all of my samples for my wet lab work, I actually was in Cameroon. I lived there for quite a few months, and it was a major turning point in my career. I still love the microbiome. It's this fantastic nexus of the immune system, your diet and external environment, all of the cool microbial life that happens in there, infectious disease. So there's so much cool stuff you can do. And my research questions I still think are very interesting, but when I was on the ground meeting the people that I was getting samples from, they were very concerned with things like clean piped water and shoes and access for their kids to education and access to for their kids to be able to have regular deworming treatments. And for me, it's industry was a bit of a self-gratification, like more real-time reward for my work. I wanted to be able to see the thing that I did, the science that I put out there, have an impact on populations in real time in a measurable way where I could see it, know that I was doing something good. Which isn't to say that there's many ways to go about that, but for me, my publications went out there and they have, been cited by other publications, but it was science that I knew was not going to directly improve in a way that I could visibly see the populations that I was working with. So being able to actually be a part of clinical trials to help chaperone and screen and be a part of the R&D process that brings new drugs to the market and help improve patient lives has been very gratifying for me to see my tools actually go out there and do that work. So.
Very cool.
Great, yeah. So you both touched on this kind of discovery aspect about what you loved about your research on academia. So I'm seeing that you thought that would change an industry, although you still found a role where you could have that kind of discovery passion for it. I'm curious to know, in which ways did you think that industry would be different from academia, and in which ways was it actually different?
Sure, why not? Yeah, it was very different. Especially consulting. It was like, you're a single person working on a project in academia, most of the time, at least from my experience. And there's no, you get things done when you get things done. And I tended to be the type of person that wanted to do things really fast. But I didn't realize what fast was until I moved into consulting. So I guess my expectation, I never really, to be honest, thought that much about because I didn't know what industry meant. It means so many things. So it's kind of hard to generalize, and it's hard to conceptualize something that is so broad and vague. But one of the things that I think has been consistent more so across all the industry roles that I've been in is very, very team oriented. And in consulting, it was I'm working on a daily basis with a manager that's reviewing my slides several times a day, reviewing this analysis, and I knew that I had to deliver these specific slides in this day, and there was no it wasn't self-directed, it was directed by other people and by the needs of clients. So I think that it necessitates more kind of collaborative behavior. Business is a very collaborative type of activity. It is also it can be in academia, I think, to different degrees for different people. But that was the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. Very team oriented, very collaborative, have the need to really be able to communicate and articulate your ideas and have everyone sort of work together to come to the right path or solution. I found, similar to what Nick said, in academia, my experience was I could do the experimentation how I wanted, I could drive that on my timeline, be independent about it. But in the current environment I work in, I have to use a team and work with a team to get where we want to go. And I also can't dive deep into the technical work as much as I used to. I have to be able to work with the subject matter experts, ask the right questions, be able to get the information from them, and figure out what's the right path forward. That could sometimes mean, okay, let's plan some experiments, let's generate some data, understand if we really think this is the right hypothesis about what the problem is. And if that's the case, then we can go that way and figure out how to solve that problem. But I don't get the chance to dive into that myself. I have to sort of try to lead the team and organize the team around getting that data, generating those solutions and figuring out which one is the most effective for the business. So that was a huge shift for me in not being maybe directly as responsible for analyzing, generating the data, which is very important regardless of where you're at. I had to sort of let go a little bit of that.
I would echo the same thing about corporate buzzwords being these highly matrixed companies. So there's lots of people that are working with you in these projects that you have to know. I wasn't expecting it to be quite that many people that you'd have to have their voices in the conversation for what you should be doing coming from a PhD, when you got to very much, with your PI and maybe some other people in the lab very much steer all parts of your research, just mine one hypothesis to your heart's content until you were ready to accept or reject and then move on to the next piece. So I think the other thing for me was in pharmacy anyway, you have to pivot pretty often and pretty hard. So you can get very invested in a particular research question in a project and then find out that the priorities for the company have changed, or the strategic decisions, they're going to go with a different asset, and you just have to stop what you're doing and move on to something else. And for folks who are used to digging in, like I'm going to say, most people in grad school are, if you're sticking out a PhD, you really have to dig into that question. That's a tough transition to make, to take something that you've invested, hours and hours of your life in generating a work product and find out that you have to step back. And the biggest takeaway I have from those experiences is that you kind of pull the pieces that you can, those learnings, any, insights from the algorithms you've developed, and try to adapt those into your next project. So you don't have to abandon things entirely, but you can't get married to a particular therapeutic area. Data science, we are, at least my group is agnostic to a specific disease area. So like, as much as I love infectious disease and vaccines, I'm now working more in the neuro area right now. And that was, I think, tough at first. No.
Thank you. Yeah, so you mentioned these pivots. So there's so many different roles in the industry, right? So I know you touched on this a little bit, but I guess I want to hear kind of your impressions on like the different roles that you've played in industry as a whole.
Sure, go ahead.
And when I started, I was a data scientist, and as I've moved up and I've taken on a more managerial path, I have less day-to-day time to actually do the on-the-ground analytics. So I'm coding fewer and fewer things, and I'm sitting in more and more higher level mixture of administrative and strategy meetings. The strategy piece has been fun because you get to shape a lot of the direction of where projects go, and you get a lot of time to do thought leadership. So talking to senior level executives, being the intermediary who's explaining the data to date and proposing what you would like to do and making a pitch. So that's been exciting to kind of move more into that. But I do still miss the, actually getting to do some of the pull your sleeves up work and get to try out some new different kinds of cool algorithms, apply some new kinds of techniques. So I don't get to do as much of that in my day to day.
Yeah, done a lot of things. So consulting, so I think the way I break it down is kind of big company, small, fast growing startup versus founder of the startup. They're very, very different types of things. And starting at BCG as a consultant, I liked that, very, very high capability teams, like working fast, kind of cool, interesting problems for these massive companies. And it didn't hurt that they would, pay for nice restaurants and hotels. But I wasn't that engaged in the questions a lot of times. They just seemed kind of trivial compared to science, to be honest with you. Moved to a large company at Illumina, and really enjoyed the company. I liked kind of stepping away from consulting because it had ownership over something, and I actually got to build things and had budget to be able to do that. And that was cool. I I pivoted because I personally found that I'm just really impatient. And it takes a long time to build something in a big company. Because there's just, you have to get it approved, or I guess as a startup, I can make a decision today and like we can build it tomorrow and then put it on the website in 2 days. And I love that aspect of it. So I really like that part about being about starting a company, kind of the autonomy. It's like I gave up a huge amount of kind of safety in some ways, but you never know about safety. I don't think you should plan your career around like what feels safe, because we've all seen people get laid off in the last couple of years, a lot of people, and so I don't think that necessarily one is safer than the other. You have to kind of like risk, right? You have to weight these risks, and so I do miss the kind of the reliability and the feeling of safety in a larger company, but I don't know. I like the ability to pivot quickly. I also did a stint in venture capital, and that was cool because you get to see all these interesting new companies. And but I didn't like the fact that I wasn't actually building anything. I was always just supporting other people to build things. So I realize it's a lot.
Okay, so for me, yeah, leaving my biophotonics lab and leaving academia, honestly, like part of it was just trying to get my foot in the door, right? So my first role was honestly very different in the sense that I was an engineer on the manufacturing floor working as an NPI engineer. So that meant I interfaced with product development, and a sustaining engineer, meaning I had to, if there was a problem on the manufacturing floor, I was there to try to help solve that problem, bring the line back up and get things moving. That was terrifying because I was worried about making mistakes that would cost the business money. But I quickly began to realize I didn't have to do everything on my own. I could work with teams. It did require a lot of coordination and planning and communication with manufacturing, because if I wanted to try and fix something, I had to essentially let everyone know that I was taking over a tool and working on that tool and trying to address the problem. So there was very much like an emphasis on, hey, you need to be very visible. What you're doing has to be very visible to everybody. That was my first year. And then my manager at the time sort of forced me on another pivot, which was to become a manager myself, which was also terrifying. So that meant I had to start, working more on helping other people grow within a business and be successful within the business and what their roles were, helping them develop, helping them execute on their job, doing what the business needed. And that was, that got me going toward, I went to like a UCSD extension program for like a sort of a mini MBA. And that was a hard pivot because it kind of goes back to what I said before. I couldn't spend as much time diving deep. I had to work with my team and work with other teams and make sure that my team was working well with those teams and creating like a very healthy, dynamic and ecosystem, which was, it's not super technical in that way. So that was a very different environment from like the environment I was in academia. So 8 years later, I have a much bigger team, and I've learned a lot more about what they refer to as people leading or people management, right? I'm trying to make sure these folks are successful in what they're doing, hiring people, helping them establish themselves at the company and having value and impact for business. That's not at all what I got exposed to as a grad student. So it's very cool in that way.
And on the topic of teams, so you're going to this role, this company. Who do you go to when you need to learn all these things, or what can you do yourself to help prepare yourself for these meetings?
ChatGPT. I'm kidding, but I'm not. Usually my first line of text. No, but I mean, you kind of cultivate relationships over the years, and I try and like as much as possible surround myself with people that I think have interesting ideas, smart, but are also like just good people I want to talk to and hang out with. And so I have, you know, several of them that I lean on for various things and that I've kind of learned, okay, this person has expertise in this and this person has expertise in this, and I try and give back as much as possible. I think that's been a really critical thing, is like, you know, you want to be engaging, you want to do things to help others, because it eventually comes back around. But like I feel like I've been very fortunate to have people to lean on, but also at the same time, something I've really had to learn as a founder is like, you just have to start trusting yourself at the same time. Like you're a smart person, you can like reason through things, and you might make some mistakes, but like as long as you're kind of going in the right direction, you know, you learn to make big decisions on your own, and with some guidance. But like when you're making 15, 30 decisions in a day, I can't stop and ask somebody. So I use ChatGPT.
I would say lean on your network. One of the great benefits about being in a grad program where you have people that are ahead of you is they're going to go off into their career paths most of the time before you. Watch where they go, talk to the other people in your lab, get some insights as to, you know, if you're looking at industry position, what skills are they looking for? What's it like there? Do you really want to work for that company or for that group? Like, have some honest, candid discussion. They are your first, best, most honest resources you can have. And they can also help get your resume to the top of a pile by handing it off to a real hiring manager and not having to go through a website, hope that you've matched all the keywords. So that's huge. You still have to get yourself the job. You still have to do the interview, but it doesn't hurt to get that leg up by having that friend say, hey, hiring manager, I'm vouching for this person. They're good. And realistically, I would say it's not gaming the system, because it's what everybody else is doing right now. So use that to your advantage. And in terms of, paying it back, I really tried to make myself available to other people that have gone through my program, I'm very fortunate. I was allowed to bring a couple of interns that work with me right now. So I've been allowed to, be able to mentor them through their internship journey. That's been a great privilege. So just keep that momentum going and remember how people advocated for you in your career, industry or academia. Just pay it forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess I lean heavily on some of the senior engineers and staff engineers in the manufacturing space for me when I first started, saying like, what can I do? What can't I do? Help me understand like how I navigate this environment. It's very different from a lab that I'm used to. And then when my manager was encouraging me to become a manager myself, I leaned heavily on him, obviously, and he helped me understand that there were a lot of mentors within the company that I could reach out to. So for me, it was like establishing, good mentorship from outside of where I was working, as well as really leaning heavily on my own manager to help guide me through that. They say most of the time you learn 70% of what you really learn is experiential. It's what you're doing at work, right? Besides just reading out of a textbook. So like, that's how I think got more and more comfortable with being a manager, was just time in the role. And the next point, like making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, and essentially just trying to prevent myself from making those mistakes again. So for me, it was very much like a bit of a rocky, bumpy road as a manager. But I then, after I got a little bit of traction, got a little more accustomed to like hiring people and what I'm looking for. I then tried to expand my understanding of the business. So I, asked, can I get involved in this UCSD extension program? What will that take? And really just driving some of that independently, driving that forward on my own to try to learn what I could outside of my current constraints of, having to do my job. So for me, that's how it was.
Oh, one more thing. I love that. I think if you're in school, like use the tools that you have available. The fact that you're a student, like people want to help students, and they care. And so like reach out and like, and just be humble and be like, I want to learn, I'm trying to learn about this. I don't know. And I think, and I find that like the more you approach these things with humility and you can kind of like use the fact that you're a student, now is a really good time to build a network with total strangers. You could reach out to them and, you know, you might not think, but if they went to a similar graduate program, they went through a similar experience, like, there's a lot of value in that. So like, you don't have to start out with a massive network.
Yeah, I would also just add to what I hear being said over here, that asking is the big thing, whether or not it's a stretch assignment, a peer that you want to connect with, a mentor, a new stretch assignment, whatever that looks like. The worst people are going to say is no. Maybe it could be a mean no, but that's the worst thing. I say that to myself a lot. The worst you're going to hear is a no. So put yourself out there.
And it doesn't take much time, right? It could be like an hour or two a week, and you start building that relationship, you start building that network, you start gaining that traction. That matters because it quickly adds up. So, you know, for me, it was like, I'm terrified of taking on this new role. And I made sure that when I was meeting with my manager about having to do what I was supposed to be doing, I extended that time. I'm like, you're putting me in a position where I'm on tilt, right? I just don't know what I'm doing as well as I did in other things. And he was like, fine, let's add the time. Let's make sure we're, you know, connecting that way every week and sticking to it. And that paid off because it just takes time.
So with this your network, ask for help. What are the avenues that you all use to build and maintain your networks?
So I actually try to reach out to people at work that are not within my own board. So product development, advanced devices research, people that are doing work way upstream of me before I even get to see what they're working on. Like I'm trying to talk with those folks and set time to be able to say, hey, can I learn more about your area? It helps me in my role, but it also, I feel like it builds the networking and the relationships within for me. I also try to look at even outside of like just the technical areas. I'm trying to understand more about business. So I'm trying to do the same thing with folks from finance, from HR. As a manager, that's a big, you know, team I work with is human relations. So like just trying to understand their constraints, their world, and just continuing to like, can I set, you know, 30 minutes on your calendar? Is that okay? Right. That's one thing I do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is applicable. Well, my fact that I have a podcast is actually pretty helpful in this regard. I do a bunch of community building things as well. So I get a group of about like 30 founders and investors, or 50 sometimes, like to together on a monthly basis to talk about the intersection of AI and bio. The podcast has actually been great, and I'm not saying that like all of you should go out and start like a big club or a podcast, but like finding things that you're kind of excited about and just like being a person that's going to do something about something, and like get people together. Those things compound over years, and like a lot of my earliest customers were podcast guests, or they're people that come to these meetups that I do because I've become friends with them, and so just find something that you're passionate about and like get involved. And my recommendation is like I always want to buffer this a little bit, because I in one sense I believe that if you're like going through graduate school, you should heavily deeply focus on the science, become a really good scientist. Like that's going to help you no matter what you do. But also look up and like get involved in other things, and maybe start some things.
Those are great answers. I'm trying to think of what I could add on to the like cherry on top of those. I guess again, coming from a very matrix organization where a lot of us either are fully remote or hybrid and we're all over the world, there's not a lot of opportunities to cultivate spontaneity and these kinds of organic conversations that you could strike up around the coffee pot, like I would do in grad school, that would like spark all these ideas. you have to seek those connections out a bit more aggressively on your own independently. And I found that one way that I do that is by some of the real world evidence generation that I've been a part of has just put me in touch with different departments within the organization that R&D probably wouldn't interface with. So colleagues in med tech, colleagues in our commercial work, all over the place. And I've been able to leverage a lot of those different connections to be able to do things like fund a massive data set that we wanted to ingest for the company. That's been doing a lot of good work for our international outside the US incidents work. Just be open to having those conversations and making them yourself, especially as we continue to be in a kind of hybridized world. And networking may not always look like being able to have in-person meetups. How can you find other ways to have those coffee conversations and setting those up yourself? Like, don't assume that they're gonna happen for you. Go make them happen, which is hard if they're introverts in the room, but find yourself a buddy who's a bit of an extrovert and get them to come along, ride with you, and the two of you can network together.
Introverts can do it too. I'm an introvert, very much an introvert.
Introverts, please tell me more about how you build those soft skills with people. Get that courage to ask. How do you know which questions to ask?
For me, it's part, I like having one-on-one conversations. I like, I have a harder time in a room of people where I have to go and mingle around and it's just not as energizing to me. Not saying I don't want to talk to you guys after this, by the way. No, but I think that there's just different strengths that you can that people rely on. It's like not better or worse to be an introvert or an extrovert. You lean into the things that you like and the things that hopefully the best parts of them. And I don't know. I think that all types can succeed in the world. So I don't know that I let it define me. I just kind of utilize it. I play it as it works for me.
I guess I would, from my perspective, I sort of got forced into an environment where I'm basically having to ask a lot of questions all the time, regardless, because sometimes my butt is on the line a little bit. So I have to be sure I'm not holding back, and I need to get the information I need to get. So I'm trying to ask my team, the groups around me. I have to be forced into that sort of, and it's a little uncomfortable. One thing that I've sort of learned is if I'm not uncomfortable, probably not growing, right? So there is that battle inside me. It's sort of like, oh, I'm a little on the quiet side, more introverted, but in this environment at Illumina, my current job, like I'm forced out of that. But I sort of try to be embracing it because, like I said, it's uncomfortable, but that can be good, right? That usually means growth. So I maybe I've been lucky in that way, right?
I think the best way to have those conversations can sometimes be to not be daunted by what somebody else comes to the table with. There's so many brilliant people at UCSD. There are so many brilliant people at Penn. I'm surrounded by them as well at JJIM. I find that most people we're scientists. We're all usually innately very curious people. And you can sort of develop that connection to get to know somebody, to then establish that bigger research connection, that networking opportunity, that collaboration. By just talking to them like you would a normal person, ask them about what they're interested in. I keep bees on the side. I'm the urban beekeeper for my company as a hobby. I do it on the canyon. I will talk to you ad nauseum about the science behind bees, even though I have no qualifications officially in it. Like, just approach people and make that rapport. And once they're like, oh, that's a cool person, I'd like to, get to know them better. They do cool work. Maybe we can find some opportunities to work together. Those are the kinds of connections that you'll make both within and outside of companies and in academia too. So.
I was going to add something actually I just thought of, because I think about like being an introvert in a big room, you're talking to people or you're having this sort of hot debate about what needs to happen and how we're just going to solve these problems or what our strategies are or tactics are. But the communication for me, hasn't always just been in that room. There are ways that you can navigate those situations by communicating one-on-one with people. Talking, we use email and Teams and everything. So we're just like, there's this like whole network of communication going on. It doesn't happen all within that 1 hour or 2 hour meeting where you have to be saying everything and sort of like leading or having all the answers. You can work with the people and communicate and say, okay, I know this person knows this, I can talk to them. I can bring that back into the conversation and we can figure this out, but it doesn't always have to be in that one meeting, right? So there's other ways to sort of get around that.
I think we have a question, and if I missed any other questions, give me like a big wave,
Yeah, I have a question that's mostly directed toward Dr. Edwards, but all panel members are welcome to answer if you have some input. So when you were transitioning from working in industry to starting your own business, I'm curious about how you managed that transition. Did you think for a long time that you wanted to start a business, or did you just have an idea and decide, I'm gonna go for it? And were you still working when you decided to start your business, or did you leave industry and go full-time and try to have a startup? And
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I avoided it for a really long time. I never wanted to be founder or a CEO, like, this kind of scary to me. And I had opportunities to start companies. So I started actually, started a couple of companies, but then I walked away, or kind of to me, it was never really about like being in control or like starting something for the sake of starting something. To me, I always had to feel like it was the right place, right time. Like I was in the right situation in my life. And I was working for a venture studio, which a venture studio is a company that these are groups that they bring in ideas from different people and they help entrepreneurs start companies. And the venture studio was actually pushing me to start a company, a therapeutics company, for a while. And I was just like, no, like this, it doesn't make sense for me because I didn't feel that passion, that drive, like personally. I have always been just more excited in technology and tools, and in broadly like helping, like facilitating helping scientists. So I kind of learned that across the years as I did this, as I built a podcast to, I learned that I really like working with scientists, and I always felt like because I had family, I couldn't take the big risk of jumping off to build something at the same time, and so I didn't. When that started to change was it kind of, it felt like there was like an emergent property that I couldn't explain, where it was like it was the right time from a technology perspective. I had an idea where it was like, I can't get this out of my head. I had spent some years helping other companies build and commercialize new tools. And so for me, it was like, I had to feel like things had prepared me for a while, or I'd been prepared for a while, because I would not have done it on my own. And so I took a leap. I actually just left the job with my wife, who stays at home with our kids, which is a huge, that's huge in and of itself. That I had the ability to be able to do this, like commit full time to building a company, but like I had to jump off and be like, I don't know if there's a ground underneath me, and that was incredibly scary. But the excitement that I had and the conviction that I thought that this would work, because so many things I kind of prepared, it overcame the fear, and eventually at some point I just was like, okay, I'm just gonna do it and I'm gonna figure out how to make it work and it works. At least, I mean, it's not like we're out of the clear or anything. We're still an early stage startup, but it was not a small trivial decision for me. But I know other people that are just like, they have it in their blood and they're like, I'm gonna do something, I don't, like I have a technology that I've already built or something like that. Like there's lots of ways to do it. That was just me. Yeah.
I have a follow-up, I guess, where Illumina and Johnson can chime in. If you do want to start a company, do you run into risk with your bigger, like, or in terms of, hey, can't be too similar? How do I distinct myself from this big partnership?
Like if you're saying if I wanted to start a business now with the role I have,
Right.
yeah, that would be there's landmines everywhere. I'd have to be very careful about that. Because I do, obviously I sign an employee contract and that stipulates various things, but if there's any gray area that can get really dangerous, I think. I've never tried, so I don't really know, but that's my first impression.
Yeah, there's mechanisms within Johnson & Johnson that if you wanna do like a spin-off or some kind of like center or like think tank type group, you can do that within the company. But similarly, it's a big company, so you sign a lot of legal agreements about intellectual property. And you cannot take something that the company could show was something that you'd already started to develop in-house. So it's definitely possible. You just want to be very careful. If I have a great idea about AI with bees, and I've got many, I want to make sure that I'm not setting up my equipment on my beehives on campus or using company time to work on any of my code, or, you have to make a very clear divide on that. It's definitely possible, but negotiating those boundaries about what would be allowable as like a group that you could start up within a company and how that would look is going to be specific to every company that you work with. And you'll want to be very careful if you want to spin off your own company while you're working for one at a time.
A lot of these things I would say also are it's very much manager dependent in some ways. Like, and that, like, there's legal aspects of it, but like, sometimes some managers are more like, oh, I don't care, you go do whatever thing, and maybe I won't go into too much detail here. But I think being upfront and kind of if you are going to do something like that, you want to clear any conflicts very early. And part of that is just like having a good relationship with your manager. Like when I started my podcast, I talked to my manager. I was like, hey, like I'm probably going to post on social media, and I think it was really helpful so that I just like maintain that relationship so they didn't like look at me as doing something, outside the lines.
Yeah, I feel like a great idea. I feel like the safest thing you can do is to document your ideas. And whatever you're doing, whatever you're building, you have to document that, right? You should, or whatever you want to build. If it's a company, you want to protect that intellectual property. If it overlaps with what you're doing at work, then it gets, really sticky.
You're doing you want to spin a company out of some work that you're doing at the university, do the work at home. On your own computer. Do it in the lab. Unless you want to go to the tech transfer office, which I should do that too.
With that, we've gotten a trend more of like more kind of remote hybrid work. I mean, do you feel like that's changed things in that regard?
I've got a little switch that goes between my monitors and my personal computer and my work computer, and I try to keep those things siloed as much as possible. To tie in what we were just talking about with that. So, if I have a new business idea and it's not something that's specific to my company, it's happening on a separate machine. More broadly, you're asking about just has being hybrid changed the workplace or being in a remote. I got hired from my postdoc during COVID, and I think I've only ever known a hybrid flexible work environment. And before that, I was in lab, like, most grad students, most days of the week. So I think that there are pros and cons. I love the ability to, I've got a 3-year-old little girl. I love the ability to not have to worry about factoring in my morning commute when I'm thinking about the time I get to spend with her in her waking hours. I love the ability to be able to, take a pause in the middle of the day and go get a workout in and then, tag my hour on at some other point of the day. That's great. I think the spontaneity of interpersonal communication that you get from being around people in real time is still very important. I'm not saying I want to go back to being full-time in person at all. But I like those touch points. I feel like, as a result of having my interns on site this last summer, I've been on site a lot more and I have made more connections with people who are overlapped with my work product, who I may have seen CC'd on emails and never even realized worked at the La Jolla campus until they happened to just be sitting across from me at a desk and happened to oversee a deck I was putting together or something I was working on. And that has led to a lot of really great collaborations and new insights that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think find what works for you in this new working landscape. And one of the benefits of being somebody in the AI ML space is I can kind of take a lot of my work with me. That's been one of the benefits of not being in the wet lab is I don't have to have a time point to go split cells. I can take my computer with me. So that's been a really nice piece of it too.
I have to build the AI for bees. I don't know what it is, but I also like working in person. I think is the positive aspect of it is you're kind of increasing your left surface area, which is you meet people randomly, have conversations that pop up, and those sometimes lead to really interesting things. And so you have to figure out. To me, I work almost fully remote with my co-founder. He's in Seattle, and it actually works really well for us, just because when I have a question, we'll just call each other whenever. It's when we're in and out of meetings, and so it's almost like I've simulated a real world environment in the work environment, because I do think that there's the spontaneity of being in person is really helpful. But I definitely don't want to go back into the office all day, every day. I'd rather just engineer some of those things in my schedule.
Yeah, 100% agree. If the flexibility is great, but I do believe that in-person contact is still very important. Again, I probably get very lucky because my team has to be in the manufacturing space, so they have to be down on the equipment. So I have to tell them we're hiring you to be on site, but we will flex and be hybrid, as it's needed. My role, I don't do that. I don't go down to the manufacturing floor, so I can work remotely all the time, but I don't, because I want to be present for my team and I want to have that interaction with everybody who's around, and there's huge benefits of that. So I'm living the total hybrid flex lifestyle, but trying to also be present for my team and people at work and benefit from all the stuff that they're talking about.
Yeah, just a few more minutes, so we'll take questions from everyone.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there any, to your knowledge, do you have any, about opportunities to integrate field work or international travel, with any organizations, companies?
I traveled a little bit when I was at Illumina. I was traveling a little bit. Most of my experience has just been you travel where you have to go for business. Unfortunately, it's less exploratory. I don't know. Consulting is actually interesting if you just want to if you want to travel and see different cities. I was traveling 4 days a week every week, so there, you can kind of. And then when I was at Illumina, I was working in a global role, and so I would go to Japan, or I would go to Dubai or Mexico City, so I don't know that. I don't know.
For me, being in operations does mean I get to have that interaction. It's just because there are other manufacturing sites around the world. There's a site in Singapore, a site in Madison, so we have a research site in Cambridge. So just because of that and the fact that I interface with those people, I have to, meet with them obviously, but I've gotten a chance to travel and have that, but it's not a lot.
I was able to attend some different group meetings in Leiden and in Brussels as part of my work, but it's very, again, conference-based, meeting-based. Field work that's not something I've done since I was in my PhD. I almost had a chance to do, fun side story, a fieldwork project that was around some ring vaccination strategies and Ebola vaccines that we were putting together a while ago. And part of the ask was, how do we successfully identify any research participants who have had our vaccine, who become infected with Ebola at clinics and may not be conscious and can't do, informed consent and tell you what their name is. And so we were coming up with tech that would do retinal scans when they were actually being enrolled and starting the study with permission, but they would be able to do a retinal scan of the patient. And when we were talking about how we might see variation in the eye based on the presentation of the disease, because you can get a lot of issues with burst capillaries and other things there. They were like, it'd be great to actually have you come out on the ground here and be able to run some of these tests. And I said, oh, it's like Ebola, Suntrek. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm the most qualified person. So I kind of, they ended up not using that particular application, but I think that fieldwork, as maybe we've come to think of it for graduate programs, is not something that I think big pharma does necessarily. I know that there are lots of vaccine companies that actually do more of the on the ground work. For instance, Global Viral is one of them. They're all over the place and they have much more of a fieldwork based component. So you can find companies that do that for sure.
I have a question. Y'all talked about kind of, I guess, talked a little bit about failure, talked a little bit about taking a leap, not knowing there's anything under you. How do you feel that, I guess, your experience in your different teams and companies, what was their culture around failure? And their tolerance for that, because industry, everything costs money. So.
Great question. It took me a while to figure this out, or learn a little bit about this, but failure is okay, as long as you're sort of learning from that. And I try to instill that in my team, because if you're not failing, you're probably not trying hard enough. You're probably not stretching. I'm saying this based on, being basically terrified of making failures as an academic, and then, like I was explaining, getting into a new role at Illumina. But you got it. I try to encourage that for all my team. You got to be stretching. You got to be pushing, and failure is okay. My sort of job is also to make sure the failure isn't too big. The analogy I give is, it's like a tree, right? You can make mistakes and chop off a leaf or a branch or whatever, but if you make a big mistake, that's a problem, right? So I'm trying to help put sort of boundaries around how big of a risk are they going to take on something, and then but promoting that risk appetite, because that's where you're really sort of stretching and growing. So I personally have tolerance for it, but you're going to get a different answer from different people in different companies, right? So.
Yeah, I think it's the turning point for me in graduate school was when I started to realize that it wasn't failure is just a refining of your hypothesis, right? We're all building models of things as we go along, and you have to test those models. And so as a PhD student, I learned to do a technique where I could every single day see the results of my experiment live firsthand. And that made a big difference, because then it didn't take 3 months to plan a an animal behavioral experiment and then not get results out. So like trying to find ways to kind of shorten the iteration time and like lower the risk a little bit, like take the time on big decisions, but like just have a mental model in your head of like what's going on and you know, I don't know if that necessarily translates to how other people view failure, like how corporate companies view it. But I think, you know, a lot of it is really just about how you maintain and cultivate relationships. You got like part of it is like setting expectations with people when you first start working with them. Like, that like, I'm here to learn something. And so you can kind of manage, I think, a little bit the perceived risk of failure and like and kind of warn people like, hey, I'm learning, yeah. Yeah, so I think like sculpting it in advance helps.
I think in pharma, it's failure is the majority of what you come to expect. For every 30 early stage assets that we bring to our clinical pipeline, this is across pharma, you expect one to actually make it to regulatory approval. Part of the reason why drugs cost a lot of money is because it's very expensive to run these clinical trials across all these potential different assets that you need to evaluate, make sure that they're safe and efficacious. You can get through a phase 3 clinical trial, towards the end of it, get a data readout, find out that your HIV vaccine is not as efficacious as you thought it was going to be, and that will effectively kibosh the program. You have to take those learnings and be willing to be humbled by the work that you've done, be willing to reach out and make new partnerships. So, you know, that's looked like a lot of data sharing and research sharing. How do we make the next better HIV vaccine? That might not look like something that we do alone. It might be something that we partner with other companies to bring to fruition. It's all about taking those learnings away from it. So I would say that, you know, no company ever wants failure, but it has to be built into how we build safe, effective drugs. So it's something that we have an uncomfortable but necessary relationship with.
We're signaling that we're running into the top time.
So
But at least failure, we can resonate with that as graduate students.
yeah, thank you. Sorry, I thought it was 4.
You said 3:45, which was 10 minutes.
Oh my God, I am so sorry. All right, thank you so much to our panelists. Apologies for the timing error on my part.
We love that. We're engaged.
Okay, yeah, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ben McMahon. Dr. Ben McMahon is a group leader of the theoretical biology group in the theoretical division of law